What if I told you that cherished, handwritten groundbait recipe from your grandpa, the one that smells of nostalgia and promised catches, is the very reason you're blanking session after session? It sounds crazy, I know. We're taught to trust the wisdom of the old-timers. But today we're diving deep into the dark side of those secret family bait recipes. I'm going to show you the hidden ingredients and common mistakes that can turn your honey hole into a dead zone. And listen, it's not about the fish being picky. It's about something much more serious happening right under the surface in the silt and mud. Before we get into it, I have a question for you. Do you swear by an old family recipe? Let me know in the comments right now. I have a feeling you might change your mind by the end of this video. For generations, these recipes have been passed down from father to son, from grandfather to grandchild. They're a part of our fishing heritage. You can almost picture it, a weathered notebook with scribbled ingredients like a handful of this, a pinch of that. The core belief is simple. If it worked for Grandpa back in the day, it has to work for me now. And let's be honest, sometimes it does. You might have a great session, pulling in fish after fish, and you think the old magic is real. That success is what keeps the myth alive, but it's the catastrophic failures, the dead sessions, and the slow degradation of a fishing spot that we never talk about. We blame the weather, the barometric pressure, or just bad luck. But the real culprit could be the very bucket of bait you so carefully mixed the night before. First, let's talk about the myth of more is better. Many old recipes are built on the idea of creating a strong, pungent, fermented cloud in the water. Grandpa would mix his grains, bread, and maybe some potatoes, then leave the bucket in the sun for a few days to get ripe. The logic was that a sour, alcoholic smell would draw fish in from miles away. And while a little fermentation can be attractive, these old-school concoctions often go way too far. The mix becomes overly acidic, creating a soupy, alcoholic mess. When you dump this into your swim, you're not just feeding the fish, you're drastically changing the water's pH in that area. This acidic shock can repel fish, especially sensitive species, and it can even harm the beneficial bacteria on the lakebed that are essential for a healthy ecosystem. That sour smell isn't a dinner bell, it's a warning sign. Now for one of the most dangerous, yet common, ingredients, uncooked particles. Think about it. Recipes often call for dry maize, tiger nuts, beans, or wheat. The old method was just to toss them in the mix dry, assuming they would soften up in the water. This is a catastrophic mistake. These hard, dry particles are like tiny sponges. When a fish, like a carp, eats them, the grains enter its digestive system and begin to absorb water and expand. This can cause severe internal bloating, pain, and in many cases a slow and agonizing death. Imagine eating a cup of uncooked rice and then drinking a gallon of water. It's the same principle. You might see fish in your swim initially, but if they eat this stuff, they will either become too distressed to feed again or simply die, leading you to believe the spot has just gone cold. It's a silent killer that many anglers are completely unaware of. Let's move on to the foundation of so many classic ground baits, bread. Specifically cheap, processed white bread. It's used as a binder and a cheap filler. You soak it, squeeze it out, and it creates a nice fluffy base. The problem is, this stuff has almost zero nutritional value for a fish. It's like fish junk food. It fills them up without providing any of the protein or energy they need. So a fish might eat a bellyful of your bread-based mix and then simply stop feeding for the rest of the day because it feels full. Furthermore, when large quantities of bread break down on the lake bottom, they create a pasty, sludgy mess. This white sludge can smother the lake bed, killing off the natural invertebrates and insects that fish would normally be foraging for. You're effectively paving over the fish's natural pantry with a useless, gooey carpet. Another secret ingredient from Grandpa's kitchen was often dairy, a splash of sour milk, some old pungent cheese, or even yogurt. The idea was that the strong fermented smell was a powerful attractant, and to a small degree, the amino acids in dairy can be appealing to fish. However, the dose makes the poison. When you introduce large amounts of milk or cheese into an aquatic environment, it decomposes very, very quickly. This rapid decomposition is carried out by bacteria, and the process consumes a massive amount of dissolved oxygen from the water. In a small enclosed swim or on a hot day, with low oxygen levels already, dumping a bucket of dairy-based groundbait can literally suffocate the fish in your area. You create what's called an anoxic zone, an area with no oxygen, and the fish will either flee immediately or, in the worst case, perish. Now let's talk about a simple seasoning, salt. Salt is a fantastic fish attractant and a key component of many modern baits. Fish need it for their bodily functions. Grandfather knew this, and many old recipes call for a heavy hand with the salt, thinking more is always better. The problem is they were often fishing in vast rivers or massive unpressured lakes where the salt would quickly dissipate. Today, on smaller, heavily fished commercial waters, dumping in huge quantities of salt can have a devastating effect. It can effectively sterilize the bottom of your swim. It kills the delicate plant life, wipes out the microorganisms and invertebrates, and can make the area uninhabitable for long periods. Instead of creating a dinner table for the fish, you're creating a barren desert where nothing can live or grow. It's a classic case of a good thing being used in a destructive way. Alongside salt, sugar was another go-to ingredient. Sweet corn, molasses, honey, or just plain white sugar were all common additions to sweeten the mix for carp and bream. And fish do have a sweet tooth, so to speak. But again, the quantities used in old recipes were often extreme. This sugar bomb approach does more harm than good. A massive, unnatural spike in sugar in the water column can fuel explosive growth of the wrong things, like harmful bacteria and algae. You might be contributing to an algae bloom that turns the water green and cloudy, which in turn blocks sunlight and further depletes oxygen levels when it dies off. You're not just feeding the fish, you're force-feeding the entire ecosystem a dose of sugar it can't handle, which throws the delicate natural balance completely out of whack. Many old recipes have a line that says something like, "and a dash of my secret spice." This could be anything from the kitchen cabinet, curry powder, chili powder, cinnamon, garlic powder. The angler believed this unique scent was his secret edge. While some of these can be effective in tiny, tiny amounts, most of the time they were used far too heavily. Spices like chili powder contain capsaicin, which is an irritant. In high concentrations, it can irritate a fish's gills and sensitive mouth parts. Instead of attracting them, it actually causes them discomfort and makes them avoid the area. Think of it like this. You might enjoy a little pepper on your food, but you wouldn't want to eat a whole bowl of it. By piling in these strong, random spices, many old-timers were effectively seasoning their bait with fish repellent, all while believing they were creating an irresistible attractant. Here's one that will make you cringe, using old, used cooking oil. The logic was that oil creates a nice, attractive slick on the water's surface that would pull fish into the swim. So, Grandpa would save the leftover oil from frying fish or bacon and dump it into his groundbait bucket. The problem is that these animal fats and vegetable oils go rancid very quickly. They oxidize and break down into compounds that are not only unappetizing, but can be genuinely harmful to fish. Furthermore, this oil slick does more than just attract fish. It coats the surface of the water, reducing the crucial gas exchange between the water and the atmosphere. This lowers the dissolved oxygen levels. It can also coat the gills of fish, making it harder for them to breathe, and coat the eggs of spawning fish, preventing them from hatching. It's a dirty, damaging, and outdated practice. Let's discuss the physical makeup of the bait itself. Many old-school mixes are what we call particle-heavy. They are loaded with tiny non-food items used as cheap filler, like excessive sand, fine gravel, or non-soluble powders. The idea was to create a big lingering cloud in the water. But what actually happens on the bottom is a disaster. These fine, heavy particles settle and create a dense, suffocating layer over the silt. This chokes out the natural bloodworm and other invertebrates living in the lakebed. It smothers everything. So when a fish comes to investigate, it finds a cloudy, messy area with very little actual food. The tiny particles can also get into their gills, causing irritation. The fish quickly learn that your baited area is an unpleasant, food-poor environment and will avoid it in the future. You've taught them that your spot is a bad place to be. A critical factor that was often overlooked in the old days is water temperature. A recipe was a recipe, to be used in March or in August without any changes, but a fish's metabolism is completely dictated by the water temperature. In the cold of winter, a fish's digestion slows down dramatically. They need baits that are low in oil and easily digestible. A heavy, oily, protein-rich summer mix used in the winter will just sit in a fish's gut, undigested, for days. Conversely, a light, low-energy winter mix used in the heat of summer won't provide the calories the fish need, and they will ignore it in favor of something more substantial. The one-size-fits-all approach of old recipes completely ignores this fundamental biological reality. Using the wrong bait for the season is a guaranteed way to blank, or worse, make the fish in your swim sick. We touched on acidity earlier with fermentation, but it's a bigger issue. Every single ingredient you add to your bait can affect the pH level of the water in your swim. Old recipes with their random mix of souring grains, acidic fruits, and other kitchen leftovers could create a cocktail that drastically drops or raises the pH. Fish are extremely sensitive to these changes. They have an ideal pH range they are comfortable in. When your bait creates a pocket of highly acidic or alkaline water, it's like a chemical wall to them. They will physically avoid that area because it causes them stress and discomfort. Modern bait companies spend a fortune on research to ensure their products are pH neutral or pH balanced, so they don't spook the fish. The old throw-it-all-in-a-bucket method shows a complete disregard for water chemistry, and it's a major reason why these mixes can fail so spectacularly. Let's think about what happens to the bait you don't see. Any ground bait that isn't eaten by fish immediately begins to decompose on the bottom. A well-designed modern bait breaks down cleanly, but many old recipes full of things like cooked potatoes, meat scraps, and heavy bread create a paradise for the wrong kind of life. Instead of feeding fish, you're creating a buffet for anaerobic bacteria. These are the bad guys. As they feast on your leftover bait, they release noxious gases like hydrogen sulfide, the stuff that smells like rotten eggs, and they use up all the available oxygen. So the uneaten bait doesn't just go to waste, it actively rots. It fuels a bacterial bloom that poisons the water, depletes the oxygen, and makes the area completely toxic and unattractive to any fish. Your baited spot becomes a stinking dead zone. Color has always been a big part of bait making. Old-timers used whatever they could find to give their bait an edge, including household food colorings or even industrial dyes. They wanted a bright red or a vibrant yellow to catch the fish's eye. The problem is, many of these old colorants were not water-stable or environmentally friendly. They could contain chemicals that, while safe for humans in small amounts, were not meant to be dumped into a lake. These unnatural dyes can leach into the water and the lakebed, potentially harming aquatic insects and plant life. More importantly for the angler, fish in pressured waters become wary of these blatantly unnatural glowing colors. They learn to associate that bright red patch on the bottom with danger, not food. Instead of an attractant, your brightly colored ground bait becomes a warning signal. There's a persistent and dangerous belief among some old-school anglers that fish will eat anything. This leads them to use ingredients that are far from fresh: moldy bread, stale cake, grains that have weevils in them, or freezer-burned meat. They think the stronger the smell, the better. This is fundamentally wrong. Mold and bacteria produce mycotoxins, which are poisonous compounds. Fish have a highly developed sense of smell and taste, and they can easily detect when something is off or spoiled. They are not swimming garbage disposals. They will actively reject food that is moldy or rotten because, just like us, they instinctively know it can make them sick. By using stale, low-quality ingredients, you're not just reducing your chances of a bite. You're offering the fish something that their instincts are screaming at them to avoid. You are insulting their intelligence. Context is everything in fishing, and that includes the type of water you're on. A ground bait recipe that was developed for a powerful, fast-flowing river is going to behave very differently in a small, enclosed, still-water lake. River recipes are often designed to be heavy and sticky, to get to the bottom quickly and stay there. When you use that same dense, heavy mix in a still water, it sinks like a rock and buries itself in the silt, becoming inaccessible. Conversely, a light, explosive still water mix used in a river will be washed away downstream in seconds, taking the fish with it. Grandpa's one magic recipe didn't account for these vast differences. He likely fished the same one or two spots his whole life. We fish a variety of venues, and trying to apply a single, outdated recipe to all of them is a formula for failure. It shows a lack of understanding of basic hydrodynamics. Let's tackle the concept of pre-baiting. The old-school method was to go down to the lake a few days before a session with several large buckets of this secret mix and dump it all in one spot. The idea was to get the fish used to feeding there and hold them in the area. When you're using a balanced, high-quality and digestible modern bait, this can be a devastatingly effective tactic. But when you pre-bait with one of these potentially toxic, unbalanced, old-school recipes, you're just amplifying all the problems we've discussed by a factor of 10. You're dumping massive quantities of salt, acidic material, and oxygen-depleting slop into the water. By the time you arrive to fish a few days later, the spot isn't primed, it's poisoned. The water chemistry is ruined, the bottom is rotting, and any self-respecting fish has long since moved on. You want to attract your target species, whether it's carp, bream, or tench. But a poorly designed bait often attracts the wrong crowd entirely. A mix that is too fine and dusty with lots of tiny floating particles will bring in swarms of tiny nuisance fish that are impossible to fish through. A bait that is too smelly and rotten might not attract fish at all, but it could attract pests like rats to the bankside once you leave. More importantly, you can create a situation where you feed the less desirable species so much that they become the dominant fish in the swim. For example, a very high carbohydrate bread-based mix might attract huge shoals of small bream or roach, which will mob your bait and prevent the larger, warier carp from ever getting a look in. Your secret carp recipe has become the perfect recipe for catching pests. We've mentioned oxygen depletion a few times, but it deserves its own block because it is the single most destructive immediate effect of bad bait. Every ounce of organic matter you put in the water, bread, grains, potatoes, has to be broken down by bacteria. This process of decomposition is called the biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD. A bait with a high BOD requires a huge amount of dissolved oxygen to break down. When you pile in buckets of this stuff, the bacteria go into overdrive, sucking all the available oxygen out of the water column, starting from the bottom up. This is what causes fish to gasp at the surface or, in extreme cases, leads to massive fish kills, especially during hot, calm weather. Your grandfather's recipe isn't just failing to attract fish, it is actively stealing the very air they breathe. It's an unintentional but very real act of environmental damage. All of these issues, the souring, the rotting, the uneaten particles, the sludge from bread, contribute to a serious long-term problem. Over time, the repeated application of bad bait creates a dead layer on the lakebed. It's often a black, foul-smelling silt that is completely devoid of life. The natural substrate gets smothered, and the beneficial organisms die off. This black silt is anoxic and toxic. Fish learn to avoid these areas completely because there is no food and the environment is hostile. Have you ever had a favorite swim that used to produce year after year, but now it's completely lifeless? There's a good chance that years of anglers dumping poorly made ground bait into that one spot has systematically destroyed it from the bottom up. The damage isn't temporary, it can take years for a spot to recover, if it ever does. So, after all of this, what's the solution? Does it mean we should forget tradition entirely? No, not at all. The solution is to understand the principles behind why certain things work and discard the parts that are harmful. Modern bait manufacturers have spent decades and millions of dollars on research to solve these exact problems. They create baits that are nutritionally balanced, easily digestible, and pH stable. They use cooked, safe particles and high-quality attractants that don't harm the environment. The takeaway isn't that Grandpa was a bad angler, it's that our understanding of aquatic ecosystems has evolved. The best approach today is to take the wisdom of the old ways, like the importance of scent and taste, and apply it using modern, safe, and effective ingredients. Think of it as upgrading the recipe for the 21st century. So, there you have it. That secret family recipe might be packed with love and nostalgia, but it could also be packed with spot-destroying mistakes. From uncooked grains expanding in a fish's stomach, to dairy products and rotting slop stealing oxygen from the water, the old ways are not always the best ways. The biggest and most shocking takeaway for me is how a single bucket of bait can create a toxic, oxygen-deprived zone, effectively poisoning the very fish you're trying to catch. This changes everything. It means we have to think like guardians of the water, not just anglers. Your bait isn't just a handful of food, it's a chemical and biological input into a very delicate ecosystem. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this deep dive. If this video opened your eyes, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next myth-busting episode. Now for the final, honest question. After hearing all this, are you going to look at that old family recipe differently? Let me know your real thoughts in the comments below.